Okay, now let's actually try to use MySQL commands in PHP scripts. Now, before you actually start using PHP MySQL or SQL commands in your PHP script, it's actually a good idea to create a separate PHP file that includes your login details. Alright, so what I will do, I'll create a file, a separate file, PHP file, and I will save that PHP file as a settings PHP. Right, now in the settings PHP file, I will create these variables. Right, so I'll create these 4 variables basically. The first variable is assign the host name. Now this host name is you can actually use this host name in your you can copy and paste actually, right? So I have created the host name Phoenix MariaDB, so in edu right, in a variable called host, and then I use my user ID. This is your student ID, right? So variable, and make sure for the password I use the password. Make sure when you first time log into MariaDB, change your password to something else. Don't use your Sims password because you are um, exchanging this information with your colleagues in your team and with the tutor. So we don't want we expose our Sims password. What you can do is you can actually create a separate password for the MariaDB, a random password, right? And then assign it to another variable. And then this is your predefined database created by IT. So we assign that to another variable, right? So these are the 4 variables I need. So I will save this PHP script as a settings PHP. Then what I can do is I can use that settings PHP in my main PHP file. So I can use the require ones and use the settings PHP. Okay. So then I can actually use to test the connection, right? Now here I've used another variable. I use the MySQLi underscore connect function, right? Since I have saved my settings in the settings PHP, if I want to change anything, I need to change only once in my settings PHP file, right? So I use the MySQL connect. Now remember, I'm using @ here. So there is a reason why we use the @ If I don't use the @ and I just use only MySQLi connect, if something happens and if the connection failed, it will give me a default error message. I don't want to use a default error message. I want the user generated error message. That's why I use the @ to prevent the default error message. So I use that connection function, right? And then I pass all the parameters which I have saved here, and then I assign the outcome here, right? So if it is successful, so I can use if command, and then I can process some details. If it is not successful, I can actually generate my own error message, right? echo unable to connect to the database. Okay. So we are going to use MySQL like connect function to connect to the database. If the connection is successful, it actually returns a positive integer, otherwise it will returns a false, right? So here we are testing whether it is true or false. If it is true, if it is return positive, so we execute this. Otherwise, if it is false, then it will display our custom error message. That's why we use that sign there. So if I actually um, if I go through the DB connect or attribute, if you use a kind of a print statement and see what is DB, it actually has a lot of information. This connection returns a lot of information to this variable, right? So we test whether it is success here, or else we um, um, print this error message. Now remember, when you use SQL, MySQL iConnect, you must actually follow these parameters in this order: host, then the username, then the password, and the database, right? So make sure you use this order. Okay. So I think I have already explained these things. So this is also what we have explained before. Um, so one important thing I wanted to actually tell you in this slide: if you actually create your own databases or own database in your C drive, um, you need to first connect the database using the connect function, and then you need to select the database using the select DB function, right? So that's how you need to select it. Okay, but um, if you use a Swinburne one, because Swinburne we already created a database for you, right? But if you don't use your database name here in a MySQL Connect, it will direct you to a default database. But of course, you don't have a default database in your Merkle Reserve, right, or MariaDB. So you will get an error message if you don't specify your database in your MySQL Connect. If you choose to use MariaDB in Swinburne, right? But if you create your own database in your personal computer, you need to first connect and select the database, right? But actually, um, you can actually ignore the database name first, where we can put first connection and include the connection into the connection parameter, and then you can use the select DB function to select your default database in your MySQL if you want, right? So that's something you need to actually think about. So once you have the connection to the database, you can actually execute SQL statements. So this is how we do it. This is how we write the SQL queries. So again, we use a variable to capture the result. So I use here the result variable, and I use a function called MySQL like query function. So here I am passing the SQL queries to MySQL engine. Right now here I am select asterisk from cars, right? So if I run a query using MySQL query function, the function can return one of the three values. Okay. For SQL statement that do not return any result, for example, if I wanted to create a database or creating a table, I'm not expecting any return results, right? So the return value is true. It will return, for example, I'm creating a table here, create table statement. It return true if the statement executes successfully. Otherwise it return false. So I can check using if and else command. Whether it is successful, then I can do certain things. If it is else, I can print an error message or echo an error message. The second return that we can expect is if the SQL statement that do not return the results, that do return the results, sorry. So for example, if I execute select command like this, I am expecting a list of vehicles or list of records, right? So what will happen, it will return something called a result pointer that represent the query results. So what do you mean by the result pointer? Result pointer is a special type of variable that refers to the currently selected row in the result set. Alright. So in this case, probably if I have 5 rows, so probably the result pointer will point to the first row in your result set. Right. Sometimes the SQL statement that can be fair, right? As I mentioned here. So if I SQL statement fails, okay, it will returns false state or false value. Okay, then I can actually echo error message. So these are the three things I can expect from MySQL query function. Okay. So once we execute the SQL commands, it's always better to close the database connection using MySQL. I close function. So I use the db connect variable where I capture the connection. I use that to close my database once I execute the commands. So we'll do more SQL queries in our second lecture in next week.